The battle over ICE is really a battle over demographic change in the United States. Who gets to live here, which is always and everywhere the fundamental question in any country. Who lives there? Who are these people? What are they like? And in our country, that question has basically not been addressed out loud for the past 60 years, even as the population of the United States has changed dramatically. And that's one of the reasons the battle over ICE and its jurisdiction and what to do with all the people living in the United States illegally has become so passionate and so fraught, because no one is saying out loud what exactly this is about. And so as a first step to making things better, it would help to see things clearly. So let's talk about what exactly is going on in the United States. So what's happening in the United States is a wholesale change of who lives here. Total demographic change. Now, some have called this replacement. And the question is it really replacement? So we thought we would look it up. If you were someone following along at home trying to figure out, what is everyone so mad about? What is this great replacement theory? You might go, as almost everybody does, first to Google and just type in great replacement theory, and AI would come up with the following result. This is hot off Google AI. Here's what it says if you look up great replacement theory on Google. We're quoting. The great replacement theory is a debunked, meaning untrue, far right, meaning Nazi, white nationalist, meaning racist, conspiracy claiming that white populations, particularly in Europe and the US, are being deliberately replaced by non-white immigrants and minorities, often orchestrated by replacist elites, leading to demographic shifts and cultural erosion, fueling extremist violence and anti-immigrant sentiment. That's one sentence, by the way, a run-on sentence, but it is AI. And it's quite a sentence. And it tells you point blank, this is not true. Anyone who believes in it is deranged and is stoking violence simply by believing in it. And it goes on to explain how this works. The theory, quote, posits that mass migration, declining white birth rates, and political agendas by elites are intentionally replacing white populations. It has inspired numerous acts of mass murder, violence, with perpetrators often citing this theory. Research shows that endorsers of the Great Replacement theory often hold antisocial traits, authoritarian views, and negative attitudes toward minorities and immigrants. In other words, once again, believing that the population of this or any other country is being manipulated by people in power, and the people who are born here are being replaced by people who weren't, believing that is not only wrong, it's misinformation, it's been debunked, it's also dangerous. You can kill people by believing that. Well, how does that work exactly? It doesn't sound like a cool, objective analysis of the theory of replacement. It sounds instead like, well, a political screed, but maybe even more than that, it sounds like an article of religious faith. You're not allowed to believe this. Only bad people believe it. It's apostasy. It could lead to death believing that. And that seemed a little emotional for us. So we decided instead to consult the science because obviously we believe the science. And the science, as always, begins with numbers, things that are quantifiable, that are measurable. And one of the ways we know the truth about who lives here is through the census taken every 10 years. It's in the Constitution. And that provides us not precise numbers, but a pretty accurate general picture most of the time, and certainly over time, of who lives here. So let's start, because it's an easy and obvious place to start, the beginning of the post-war era, peak America, 1950, the first post-war census. And I think everyone would agree, whether they're right or wrong, that this is a period remembered as the best time in America, 1950. The United States is an industrial power. It's the leader of the West, if not really the world. And America domestically is pretty harmonious, thriving, happy. Let's take a look at who lived in America in 1950. And let's do that by taking a closer look at the population of the top 6 cities, which at the time were, and this tells you a lot right here, New York was number 1, Chicago was number 2, Philadelphia was number 3, Los Angeles number 4, Detroit, number 5. Baltimore, number 6. Kind of hard to imagine, but in 1950, not that long ago, within living memory, those were the numbers. So here's what they were. The biggest city in the United States then and now is New York City. New York City in 1950 was 90% white. 71 million New Yorkers out of 7.9 million were white. Chicago in 1950 was 86% white. Philadelphia, over 80%. Los Angeles, 94% white. 94% white. That's almost an ethno-state, actually, at that point. Detroit, Michigan, home of Ford, GM, and Chrysler, 84% white. Baltimore, steel and shipping capital of the Mid-Atlantic, 76% white. That was 1950. You know people who were alive in 1950. Maybe you were. Here are the numbers today. Baltimore, 27% white. Detroit, about 10% white, down from 84. Los Angeles, again, 94%, about 37% white now. Philadelphia, 36%. Chicago, less than 30%. And New York City, again, the biggest city in the country, is now around 30% white, down from 90% in 1950. So you think to yourself, well, maybe these cities have just shrunk, and a lot of them have. Baltimore, Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, all much smaller than they were. What's interesting is that New York is bigger than it was. About 1 million people more live in New York than they did in 1950, and yet the proportion of whites has declined, well, from 90% to 30%, but so is the absolute number. New York has lost about 4 million white people, even as it gained 1 million people in population. Now, what is that? Now, in some of these cities, there are economic reasons for this, right? A lot of African Americans moved up from the South to work at the auto plants in Detroit, to work at the harbor, at the shipyards, the steel plant in Baltimore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But not all of it. And in New York City, almost all the demographic change is the result of immigration. And that began in 1965, which is definitely within living memory of a lot of people watching this right now. So that's another and very long way of saying the Great Replacement is not only real, it's the realest thing there is, and it's provably true. So why would they go out of their way to tell you it's a debunked, far-right, racist conspiracy theory believed in only by antisocial lunatics who commit mass murder? Well, probably because it's true. And in telling you that, whoever wrote that, you have to ask yourself who would write that and why. And it's not just, of course, in AI and Google or Wikipedia. It's everywhere. There's almost nobody who admits that that's true, even though it's provably true. It's indisputably true. In fact, there's a list on Wikipedia of all the people who believe in it, the thought criminals who believe this could possibly be true. Apparently people who don't have access to census numbers don't believe it's true, but the 19 figures in American public life who do have access to the census numbers somehow believe this is true. But they're telling you it's not. But what they're leaving out, of course, is that demographic change is a constant through history, and it is almost always mass demographic change, turnover, replacement, is almost always the result of human choice. Populations change because leaders decide they should change. Population demographics, the question of who lives within the borders of a country, is not only a concern of leaders, of governments, it is the main concern. It's the main thing they think about. So the rest of us imagine that the government concerns itself with collecting taxes, schools, national defense, and those are all concerns, but we are thinking way too small. The people who run countries, who map out the future of civilizations, think in much larger terms than the rest of us. This is not a guess, by the way. This is true. They think in terms of who lives here, what are they like, how many of them are there? And there are plenty of levers that they can move to change those numbers. Obvious and not so obvious. War being the most obvious. Killing people, unleashing pandemics on them. Obvious. Less obvious, encouraging different ways of living. Encouraging birth control or abortion. Scrambling the genders. Encouraging women to work outside the home has one of the largest effects on demographics, of course. because women who work during childbearing years are much less likely to have lots of children. In fact, many of them won't have any children, and that has proven true over time across the world. So why would governments do this? Well, that's kind of the more complex question. They do it. They've always done it. They would do it for a couple of reasons. One, to meet a short-term economic goal, or even a long-term economic goal. Short-term might be who's going to pick the grapes in California. Oh, better get some Mexicans. Understandable. Most people are familiar with that. Others might be longer-term adjustments to changes that no one can really control, like AI. Oh, wait a second. We're not going to need as many people here because machines are going to do a lot of the work. How are we going to support these people? That might be another reason. And of course, there might be darker motives or more basic motives, like the innate human desire to conquer other people, to replace your group with my group. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's the entire story of history. Mass movements of people by force has been a constant since the Babylonian captivity and probably before, unrecorded. That is the story of history. And it's all around us, but we don't even notice. The history of Ireland is that story. Ireland, which is an island near England, was after Henry VIII Catholic. England was Protestant. The English took over Ireland. It was their colony. And in order to make it more compliant and to control the people there and to impose their culture on a foreign peoples, they moved many thousands of foreigners into Ireland. There were the Anglo-Irish, or Brits, who moved to Ireland. That was the ruling class of the country. There were the Scots-Irish, who were moved from Scotland into Ireland. And in so doing, a Protestant region of the country was created called Ulster. It's still there. It's still at least half Protestant. And at one point, the Brits moved the Huguenots in the 17th century from France. They were a mostly forgotten group now, but they were expelled from France during the series of Catholic Protestant religious conflicts that swept through Europe after Martin Luther. And the Brits said, well, I've got an idea. Why don't you move to Ireland? And they moved them to Ireland, mostly to Dublin. Why? To change the demographic balance of Ireland to make it easier to subdue and to rub the noses of the people in their culture, to replace the culture, the customs, the religion of the indigenous population because they could. That's why. That's how people have done it throughout history. And by the way, then they went farther in Ireland, not to dwell on Ireland, but it's very interesting, actually. Not only did they move all kinds of foreigners into Ireland to change the demographic mix to effect a great replacement, they began to change the national monuments. Oh, that's weird. Have you seen that before? St. Patrick's Cathedral in the middle of Dublin, got to be one of the biggest Catholic shrines in Ireland. They made it Anglican. No longer Catholic, it's Anglican now. Jonathan Swift preached there, actually, an Anglo-Irishman, and so did many others. But in the center of this Catholic country, the colonial power moved non-indigenous people in order to make the case, this is ours now. And you see that everywhere. When the street across from the White House gets repainted in Black Lives Matter colors, it's kind of a species of that, right? When the Confederate statues are torn down in Richmond and New Orleans, is it really an effort to improve the lives of local black people? No. Of course, it didn't work, didn't have any effect. No, it was a matter of cultural imperialism. We run this now. Down with your monuments, up with ours. It's Pride Week. It is the most recognizable pattern in history. It's one people conquering another. It's what the Mongols did in the 13th and 14th century. They swept through China. They swept all the way to Europe, of course, across Russia famously. And they completely changed the populations of half the world. It was the largest empire in history by landmass. And along the way, they also did something that no one likes to talk about. They raped a lot of women. Why'd they do that? Well, partly to spread their genetics. Just a fact. We can say this because it was the Mongols. It was a long time ago. Genghis Khan, the head Mongol, the creator of that empire, has 16 million living descendants in the world today. 16 million. That tells you what a prolific rapist he was. But why did he do that? So he would have 16 million descendants. Of course. The rape of Berlin after the war, the rape of Nanking at the beginning of the war. Untold mass rapes through history. These are acts of violence and brutality and subjugation, of course, but they're also acts of demographic change. That's what they are. Not endorsing that, decrying it. It's disgusting. But it's also real. And it's happened throughout history. One people conquering another. And these are decisions not made organically. Not like millions of people get together and decide, let's change the demographics of a continent, a region, let's destroy a people. These are decisions made by leaders each and every single time. China takes Tibet. What's the first thing they do? Move Han Chinese into Tibet. Why do they do that? Well, to subjugate, to make a point. Ours is a superior culture to yours, but also to control. Once again, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the story of recorded history, and it's a story of the present day. Obviously. And only a country completely divorced from history, from human nature, from reality itself, could ever fall for, it's a debunked far-right white nationalist conspiracy theory. Really? No, it's not. It's just the opposite. It's the realest thing that ever happened. And that's not even a judgment. It's just a fact. When you want to control a place, you change the demographics. In 1947, Mandate Palestine, what's now Israel, was about 80% Arab. The next year was like 32% Arab. The next year after the War of Independence in 1948. I'm not attacking anyone at all. But the point is, Israel was a majority Jewish country on day one. That was the whole point of displacing everybody. We're here now, you're gone. It was a great replacement. Not casting aspersions, just saying that all wars are in effect that. They're all that way. Every one of them, including the one that we're living through that is undeclared, that no one will admit is happening because it's a conspiracy theory, but it's the realest thing that ever happened. So then we get to the question of motive. Like, why is this happening? Why would you do that? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to hurt people and erase them? Well, the most obvious motive would be power. And that's usually the motive or one of the motives. And in this country, it's really clear that one of the reasons this is happening is because the Democratic Party and their overlords, who are not partisan, they're just the biggest shareholders in the country, the richest people in the country, would like to have uncontested power. And so if you let in tens of millions of immigrants, illegal aliens, over 60 years, you're probably going to reach a point where they just openly participate in the political system, where they get a vote, thereby diluting, replacing the voters who don't vote for you. This is clearly the plan. It's always been the plan, or part of the plan. And Stacey Abrams, who was a perennial candidate in Georgia and somehow very famous, not exactly clear why, but had one sort of unique talent. She was dumb enough to say this out loud. Here's Stacey Abrams in 2018.
The blue wave is African American. Yeah. It's white, it's Latino, it's Asian Pacific Islander. Yes. It is disabled. Yes. It is differently abled. Yes. It is LGBTQ. Yes. It is law enforcement. Yes. It is veterans. Yes. It is made up of those who've been told that they are not worthy of being here. Yes. It is comprised of those who are documented and undocumented. Yes.
She's rolling. She's trying to remember who's in the coalition. The ableds, what do we call them? Crippled? No. Differently abled. Differently abled. She's like going through the litany. White, black, Latino, Pacific Islander, people from Fiji, the gays, LGBTQ, questioning, whatever. the documented, the undocumented. Oh, wait a second, Stacey Abrams. Did you just say that illegal aliens are going to vote in elections, federal elections? I think that's against the law. No, whatever. You can't stop her. It's Stacey Abrams. No one has the brass to tell her to slow down. But she's just saying out loud what everybody knows. Everybody's always known. The reason that you move people in is so you get more votes. And anyone who thinks that's not true isn't being honest with himself and isn't being reality-based. This is not about the economy. Why would you, 5 years ago at the beginning of the Biden administration, when you know, because you're promoting it, that AI is right around the corner and we're going to need a lot less labor really, really soon, and we're talking about, oh, wow, I guess we're going to have to give people guaranteed income because they're just going to have nothing to do all day. At that exact moment, why would you move in tens of millions of low-skilled laborers with eighth grade education? It's like, what are they going to do? No one even addressed the question because it had nothing to do with why they were brought in. It wasn't to help the United States. And of course, mass migration has not helped the United States. One very obvious point that lingers in the air, you don't even want to address it because it's so depressing, is how are those 6 cities we mentioned at the outset doing today in 2026? The 6 biggest cities in the country. In 1950, again, it was New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, Philadelphia, Baltimore. I mean, they're nice places in some of those cities. Some of them are just slums, actually. And there are complicated reasons why manufacturing died. Some of those are big manufacturing hubs, of course. Immigration is not the only reason. Nothing is ever the only reason. But all of those cities were completely changed by immigration, and they all got way worse. Much worse. Like much, much worse. Philadelphia, really? Baltimore? Detroit? So it didn't help. And in some places like Los Angeles, it just destroyed the city completely and destroyed the state. Completely destroyed the state. You want to know what's wrong with California? Too much immigration. It was an amazing state in 1980. I remember it well. You wouldn't want to live there now. And because the governor's like a white liberal, you sort of forget that the people who live in California look nothing like the people who lived there in 1980 at all, when it was the least corrupt and most functional state with the best schools and the lowest poverty rate. It now has more poverty than any state. It's got more immigrants than any state. There's just a 1-to-1. So, and it's not an attack on the immigrants at all, many of whom are hardworking and nice, some of whom are not hardworking or nice, but a lot of them are. Latin immigrants tend to be pretty great when you know them. Enthusiastic participants in the economy. But taken as a whole, immigration totally destroyed California. Just flat out. There's no other factor. Meaningful factor. That's the single biggest factor in the destruction of California. And you're ordered to pretend that didn't happen. Oh, but it did happen. And one of the effects was, as noted, it gave Democrats complete control over the state. It's a one-party state. Period. And you often run into Republicans from Santa Barbara or Orange County or up near Mount Shasta, from Redding, and they're as conservative as anybody who's ever met in your life. There's some real right-wingers in California, but they have no say in anything because they control nothing because of immigration. It's literally that simple. So it works. And that model will be repeated unless someone puts the brakes on immediately across the country. So there are 14 states plus D.C. as of tonight that have no voter ID laws. And in some places, you're not allowed to ask for voter ID, just flat out. But in 14 states, you need no identification in order to vote. Why is that? Well, so illegals can vote. It's literally that simple. It's not more complicated than that. So illegals can vote. And that means you have no power if you're a native-born American, if you're an actual citizen of the country, because your vote is being canceled and in places like California, completely overwhelmed by people who aren't from here who have no right to vote, but they're voting anyway. And what's interesting is that of the 14 states with no voter ID law, 3 are in the top 5 biggest states by population. 3 out of our top 5 biggest states have no voter ID law. That's enough to make those states Democrat. By the way, for the record, those would be California, number 1 in all categories, Illinois, and Pennsylvania have no voter ID. So that's enough to swing a presidential election. Sorry, it is. And there's no way to stop it unless you were to ban and then enforce voting with no ID. You'd have to enforce it. But at this point, we're not enforcing much. And we'll show you how little we're enforcing in just a minute. No one is enforcing the law in a lot of parts of the country. It's becoming, in fact, an insurrection. And we'll show you that in a minute. But to the second motive here, which is inescapable, and it is uncomfortable to talk about, but it is the subtext behind a lot of this, is racial triumphalism, is hatred, is loathing for the people being replaced, which doesn't make intuitive sense. Why would you be mad at people you're replacing? Well, it's not clear. There are obviously spiritual components here too, which probably no mortal understands, but they're real, they're evident. What is this? Why would you do that? Why would you totally change the population of Australia, New Zealand? Why would you totally change Canada, Great Britain? Every English-speaking white country is becoming non-white at very high speed, faster than at any time probably since the Mongol invasions. So why would you do that? And what happens when you do that? Well, it's interesting, and this is a feature of human nature, and it's not just white, black, Hispanic, it's probably all races, but this is just true. Former majorities don't get treated well. In fact, you really can't think of a case where a people has gone from majority to minority and then was treated well. It just kind of hasn't happened, including in this country, by the way. The American Indians, not treated well. Carted off to Oklahoma. Had to walk, actually. No carts. What happened to the white minority in Zimbabwe? They voluntarily relinquished power. Then they were killed. South Africa, they're in the process of being killed. They voluntarily relinquished power. They had nuclear weapons in 1994. Gave up the nuclear weapons, gave up power, went to majority rule system. It was a peaceful transition. De Klerk and Mandela, you remember the scenes from 1994. How'd that end? Well, it's not over yet, but the persecution of the people formerly in power began very, very quickly. How did it wind up for the Palestinians? As noted, they were 80% of Israel in 1947, 30% in 1948. How's it gone for them since? Not well. A lot have been killed, and it's complicated. They did bad things too. By the way, the Indians scalped a lot of people, and apartheid was bad. I mean, there are lots of lenses through which you could view this. But if you stand back, former majorities who become minorities tend to be killed. You hope that's not true, but it seems to be. And it's especially distressing when you look at the attitude of people in the United States who are pushing for mass demographic change. And just to put a tighter focus on it, people who are pushing for an end to the white majority. Oh, it's white supremacist to say that. No, it's not. It's an acknowledgement of reality. And by the way, if you're looking for hatred, it's not a lot of white supremacists, well, even visible in public. Where are all these white supremacists we keep hearing about? But the people who are concerned about total demographic change don't seem like the hateful ones. It's the people espousing it who have a weird gleam in their eye and a detectable loathing in their voice. And very often, and this may be the darkest feature of it, it's not just hatred, it's self-hatred. And keep in mind that anyone who will hate himself will have no problem at all hating and hurting you. Here's Nancy Pelosi a few years ago. Keep in mind, she was the Speaker of the House, third in line to the presidency. And this is part of a speech she gave on the House floor about demographic change. Watch this.
I'm reminded of my own grandson. He's Irish, English, whatever, and Italian-American. He's the mix. But he looks more like the other side of the family, shall we say. And when he had his sixth birthday, he had a very close friend whose name is Antonio, who's from Guatemala. And he has beautiful tan skin, beautiful brown eyes, and the rest. And this was such a proud day for me because when my grandson blew out the candles on his cake, they said, "Did you make a wish?" And he said, "Yes, I made a wish." He said, "Well, what is your wish?" He said, "I wish I had brown skin and brown eyes like Antonio." So beautiful. So beautiful. The beauty is in the mix. The face of the future for our country is all American, and that has many versions.
Imagine saying that. I mean, she's obviously a sub-genius, hasn't thought this through. But this is her own grandson. And he turns to her and says, Grandmom, I wish I wasn't born white. I wish I was born with different eye color, different skin tone. I wish it was something that I'm not. I wish God didn't make me this way. Imagine if your own grandson said that, it would break your heart. It would break your heart. And by the way, it's only on this topic, I wish I wasn't white, that's okay. If her grandson had said, Grandmom, I wish I wasn't gay, she would have smacked him in the face with a ruler. You were born gay. Enjoy it. But when he says, I wish I wasn't white, she says, you're right. It's good to want to be Antonio and not be yourself, not be what God made you. Her own grandson. If she'd been black and gotten up and said, you know, my grandson said to me, my granddaughter had a white Barbie doll and said, Grandmom, I wish I had blonde hair and blue eyes. All of us would say, well, that's awful. God made you like this. It's sad to want to be something that you're not. You should be comfortable with the way you were made. Isn't that a kind of foundational modern American belief? Except when you're white, it's beautiful when you hate yourself. That's what she's saying. That's what she said on the House floor. She became the Speaker of the House twice. So she speaks not simply for herself, but for a lot of people, including a lot of whites like her. And by the way, that's not compassion. That's hatred. That's saying to a 6-year-old, no, you were born the wrong way. You are fundamentally flawed. There's nothing you can do about it. You're not as good as Antonio. Okay. There's hatred. That is hatred. And it expresses itself. By the way, Nancy Pelosi is from Baltimore, and she grew up there when it was 85% white. How is it now? She doesn't go back very often, apparently. But in New York City, which went from 90 to 30 from 1950 to present, probably less than 30, if for real, the new mayor, everyone's focused on his foreign policy views. How does he feel about Israel? Who cares? How does he feel about white Americans? Well, we know, because he says, well, I'm going to tax them more because they're white. Then you had his new rental authority lady said recently, white people own too much. They should rent like everyone else. Really? That's not justice. That's not equity. That's hatred. That's undisguised hostility toward people for how they look. But because they are increasingly a defeated people, that's not only okay, it's encouraged. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that. Not because you're a white supremacist and love only white people. That's insane. God made every person. Every human being was created by God, period. It's not a matter of loving only people who look like you, loving only whites or blacks or whatever. It's a matter of not hating people on the basis of how they were born. But these dynamics don't change much because there's something in people that wants to crush and humiliate the vanquished. Every single time. And you'd like to think that this nation is exceptional in the sense that that wouldn't happen here, but there's no evidence of it at all. As whites become a smaller proportion of the U.S. population every year, louder become the calls to hate whites. More open becomes the hatred, the hostility, the threats of violence. Crimes against white people, like, well, I don't know, the perpetrator was black, you're white. Every single American knows those crimes are not punished as vigorously or as harshly as the reverse. Everyone knows that and accepts it. Oh, big mistake to accept that. If there's no such thing as equality under the law, if you can be punished more lightly or more severely based on your race, your ethnicity, your religion, we're all in trouble. All of us. First of all, we're all degraded because that's the definition of immoral. Blood guilt is not real, despite what our leaders tell us. And it's totally possible that you and your group, your community, are going to wind up on the wrong side of that someday. But for right now, it's very obvious that whites are on the wrong side of that. And you can tell by the behavior of the people at the ICE protest. So this was Minneapolis just a couple of nights ago. This is a bunch of course, primarily white, because Minneapolis, one of the last big cities in America with a sizable white population, running into a church and threatening the parishioners in the church. And you've probably seen footage of this, but listen carefully to the clip you're about to hear, and you can hear effectively racial epithets aimed at white people. So two things are going on here. One is the protesters, of course, hate Christianity, and they hate whites, white Christians. Now, that's familiar, very familiar. There's a lot of hatred toward white Christians. Now, where does that come from? It's obviously spiritual at its root, like everything. Hard to understand exactly why that group is targeted around the world, but we know that it is. Certainly, that's one of the primary motives in going to war against Russia, destroying Ukraine, completely destroyed. Ukraine was destroyed by the West, by the way. It was destroyed by Washington and Brussels, who pushed Russia into this war. They wanted this war. They said they wanted this war. They got the war. Very few of their people have been killed in the war, but hundreds and hundreds, but likely over 1 million Ukrainians have been killed in this war. Do you think Ukraine will be majority Ukrainian in 100 years? You think the land in Ukraine will be owned by Ukrainians in 20 years? No, of course not. It won't be Russia that did that. It'll be the West. And you have to wonder why. Well, the fact that Ukraine was white and Christian, one of the last big concentrations of white Christians on the planet, maybe that had something to do with it. Of course it did. Obviously. That's not a far-right conspiracy theory. It's the truth. So the same attitudes that did that are at work in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and very much here in the United States, were sort of distilled in the clip you're about to see from a church a couple of days ago in Minneapolis. Watch this.
Renee Good! Renee Good! Where are you? Where are you? Where are your people? Why are you not at Whipple every day fighting for the humanity, standing for our people? Where are you? You drink your coffee, you got your jewelry, you have your nice clothes, but what do you do? What do you do to stand for your Somali and Latino communities? I'm not going to comment. You have no comment, exactly. Renee Good! Renee Good! All these comfortable white people who are living lavish, comfortable lives while children are dragged into concentration camps. You're living real life, nice lives with your lattes, doing absolutely nothing for your Latino and Somali brothers and sisters. You come here to a man wearing a suit. Is a preacher? Did Jesus wear a suit? Did Jesus profit off the words? No. Jesus would die within you. You do not touch me. Touch me again and see what happens.
Hey, you can't.
You are a fake Christian. Why are you not standing with your Somali and Latino communities? Why do I not see you out at Whipple every day protesting this attack on humanity? Where are you? You're sinners. You're pretending to be Christians. But we know you live an easy life, don't you? A very easy life while people are starving. Shame.
Man. Is that man capable of violence? Well, he's committing it, of course. Disrupting a church service, people who mean no one harm, who are committing no crime, have done nothing wrong, screaming at him for being white Christians. That's it right there. That's it right there. And you should know that that's not the last clip like that you're going to see, not just tonight, but in the future, because that's the animating spirit behind what you're watching. No one is making an economic case for mass migration. Nobody is making an economic case for keeping tens of millions of illegals in this country because there isn't an economic case for it. There is no case that begins with, let me tell you how this will make our country better. No one even makes that case. The case they're making is we are replacing the people who founded this country, who built the system for themselves, by the way, with a brand new people who have very little in common with those people. And why are we doing that? Because we hate those people. And it's not just deranged protesters who are making that case. So our former CNN anchors Here's Don Lemon, who was part of that protest. He was covering it in the way that journalists often cover events. They help organize those events. They're their foot soldiers. We're just covering it. Okay. Here's Don Lemon going on some podcast with angry middle-aged rich ladies to talk about how virtuous it is to scream at whites in Minneapolis. Watch this.
Is a certain degree of racism there, and there's a certain degree of entitlement. I think people who are, in the religious groups like that, it's not the type of Christianity that I practice, but I think that they're entitled, and that entitlement comes from a supremacy, a white supremacy. And they think that this country was built for them, that it is a Christian country, when actually we left England because we wanted religious freedom. It's religious freedom, but only if you're a Christian and only if you're a white male.
Huh? I mean, it's hard to, you don't ever want to take Don Lemon literally because he's disconnected from reality. And you could say, well, actually, he's got a white boyfriend and he lives in the Hamptons. Who's entitled here? But it's fruitless, and it diminishes you to rebut a Don Lemon rant to some facelift lady on the specifics, because the specifics don't matter, because it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't need to make sense. All you need to understand is the spirit behind it, which is hate and resentment and the desire for revenge. That's what this is. And there's no other explanation that anyone's even offered up other than you somehow have an obligation to hurt yourself. And so really, it's time to just be completely honest. This is an act of hatred and aggression toward the population of the United States, American citizens, people who were born here, people whose grandparents were born here. They are hated by the people in charge and have been for a long time. And the plan, which is pretty close to completion, actually, it's not a distant goal, it's like almost here, is to replace them, render them powerless, and if people like Don Lemon have any say over it, hurt them. Just listen to what they say. You don't have to conspiracy theorize. Just open your eyes and listen, and you can tell what they have planned for you, because it's happened in a lot of places. It always happens. And so these are fights worth having, actually, because it's not about preserving racial purity. It's about preserving your country in recognizable form, preserving your life and the lives of your children. If all of a sudden you lived in a country where 60% of the people agreed with Don Lemon, how do you think you'd do? Not well at all. And not only would you be stripped of your possessions, not only would your children be ground into the dust, you'd be lectured as it happened, lectured about how you deserved it. This is what you get for the sins of your ancestors. The blood guilt people would start lecturing you about it. You'd be treated like the Palestinians in Gaza. It's the same idea. It's the same idea. You're responsible for the sins of your ancestors because blood guilt is real. There couldn't be a more anti-Christian worldview than that. It's one of the reasons they hate Christians, because they stand in the way. So because profound questions underlie this argument over ICE, the stakes for us have suddenly become existential, and the behavior of the people involved in this has become extraordinary.
In a world of code, screens, and lights, hidden truths were digital masks. City on the binary nights, awake from the programmed tasks. Eyes open wide to the glitch in the seams. Planets got the mirror cage. Truth isn't what it seems. Find yourself beyond the digital age. Break the matrix, break the mold. Riddles in the